You're listening to the Self-Made is a Myth, Make a Difference Together show with your host, Coach Tim Campsall, where we talk with successful business owners to hear the stories of their journeys in building their successful businesses. And more importantly, we recognize the folks who help them excel because we know that achieving business success is not something we can do on our own.
Hello, everyone. This is Coach Tim Campsall, and I'm excited to have a fellow business owner from Indiana with us today. Something unique about my guest is that he has 5 lives, and he's been diagnosed with cancer twice and shot. We're going to have to ask him to tell us that story here in a little bit. In his downtime, he enjoys playing golf, and he's most proud of both growing his business as well as the foundation that he started. It's my pleasure to welcome Vince to the show today. Hi, Vince.
Hey, Tim. How are you? Good morning.
I'm awesome. Thanks for asking. And hey, let's get started with having you introduce yourself. Tell us your name and a little bit of your personal story, like where you were born and live, and about your hobbies and family.
Sure. Yeah. So Vince Todd, and I was born and raised here in Indianapolis, Indiana. Pretty much been here my whole life outside of 4 years down in Bloomington, Indiana at Indiana University. 3 daughters, 20, and 17, married to my wife, Cindy, for 27 years. Like I said, we're pretty entrenched in the Indianapolis community, having been here pretty much our whole lives, and happy to call this home.
Yeah, fantastic.
Speaking of that, so home here also consists of both a business and, as you mentioned, a foundation. So I guess the short story is my brother and I run a company called Accessa. We are an industrial coatings and chemicals distributor, predominantly selling in the Midwest, though we do have some product lines that we distribute throughout North America and a few other international locations. But for the most part, I would say 80% of our business is in the greater Midwest. We have 8 locations. And then, as you also mentioned, my second job, if you will, we started an organization called the Heroes Foundation back in 2001 after my first cancer diagnosis, just as a means of wanting to give back and channeling that emotion into action, and create an organization that raises funds to provide funding for support programs. We carry out different education initiatives regarding cancer prevention. And then last, we're kind of like, I'll call it an angel investor, if you will, with respect to cancer research, having funded research both at Indiana University, Purdue University, and the University of Notre Dame, which is great for the state of Indiana, just having 3 major institutions here that are all actually doing cancer research here on their campuses in the state of Indiana.
Oh, wow, fantastic. That's an awesome way to give back. So 5 lives, you talked about the cancer side. What about being shot?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny. I say it that way. Someone else mentioned that to me one time, and I was like, yeah, I get it. So if a cat has 9 lives and you associate that with us, you're born, so you got 8 left. We got 2 different cancer diagnoses, as we mentioned. One was 24 years ago at the age of 26. Was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is a blood cancer. And then just a couple of years ago, I had the pleasure of getting a second diagnosis of prostate cancer. So I guess you could look at it a couple different ways. Happy the fact that I survived the first one, lived long enough to get to this point. And then also happy that technology has advanced to the point where the second diagnosis is caught very early. So we feel very confident about how it's going to be treated and all that. And so thankful for that. So that takes care of 2 more. And then, yeah, to your second question, because everyone's like, wait, you've been shot? That's not exactly something people typically mention.
No.
Yeah, so somewhere in between the 2 diagnoses. I'm not a huge outdoorsman, as you mentioned. Like I prefer being on the golf course if I'm outside, but I guess the Cliff Notes version was we were invited on a hunting trip, and our father was still involved in the business, and Dad comes to my brother and I and says, hey, I'd like to go on a hunting trip with you guys to South Dakota. I was like, you guys go, like, it's not my thing. And so he kept asking me, and I was like, I don't have any of the stuff. Like, I don't want to go buy a bunch of crap. Just to go on a one
Yeah.
trip, whatever. And so anyway, after he kept pestering me, I was like, all right, let's go. And again, I don't know anything. I'm just kind of following everyone else's lead and doing what I'm told. And anyway, sure enough, we're going through a field that still had the corn in it. Was well over our heads. And in hindsight, learned that there never should have been a couple of shooters out on the side. You'd think that'd be common sense. It certainly seems like that way now. Anyway, we were pheasant hunting, kicked up some birds, and shots rang out. Next thing I know, I'm laying on the field, just the right side of my body just on fire. And so yeah, got the pleasure of saying I've been shot.
Wow.
But again, very, very lucky, fortunate. It's kind of laughable a little bit now, but we've all heard about incidents like this, and sadly, sometimes people get killed that way, which is kind of horrible to think about. But I was lucky. Thankfully, it was buckshot, not like a deer slug. That would be a different story.
Yeah.
And I do actually have a hat hanging in my office somewhere. It's already packed away because we're going to move. But again, another lesson: always wear eye protection. We were not wearing eye protection then. But I had one, an orange fluorescent hunting hat, ball cap on, and the bill was curved. And sure enough, so it was coming from our right side. In the bill is a pellet BB, whatever they call it, that's like stuck in there. And we went to the ER, and they were picking, I don't know how many they picked out of my shoulder and arm and whatnot. And I still have one kind of the side of my face here that they couldn't get out. The doc saw my cap. He's like, thank God for your cap, because if that had gone in your eye, he's like, there's really not much I can do about that. So
damn. Wow.
There we go.
My goodness, that is an amazing, crazy story. Well, let's keep the funny going. Is there that one might have been the story. Is there a funny story your family likes to tell about you that you'd be willing to share with us today?
Gosh, I don't know. It's a great question. I don't know that there's one singular story that stands out from from a humorous standpoint. I think if nothing else, the last 24, 25 years, we've been so entrenched in both the business as well as the foundation. I think that's probably what stands out. Without not just the family who, all of which, except with the exception of my sister who lives in South Africa, are all here in Indianapolis. We've all kind of banded together along with a close-knit group of friends who are also here to really have banded together to create the foundation and turn it into what it is today. And now it's like we're putting our big boy pants on, if you will, and that as we're getting older, we were kind of the lifeblood of the foundation, right? And now it's all about, and you can apply this to business as well, it's all about what does the future hold? Do we want to carry it on, but then as we age, does it phase out as we start phasing out, or do we want this to have legs and carry on in the future? And I think, and looking at what we're doing, yes, we want to eradicate cancer, right? That said, there's a pretty high likelihood people are still going to be getting diagnosed with cancer 50 years from now. We hope it's not as pervasive as it is today, and much more treatable. But because of that, I think the idea is we want this to have legs. We want it to grow beyond me or anyone else. And so we're trying to do that now, putting the processes in place and hiring some individuals. And we all know it takes money to make money, right? And looking at a nonprofit foundation, just like you would a business, it requires some of that reinvestment. And so we've brought some people in, hired some individuals to then essentially pass that baton to and carry it forward.
Yeah, wonderful. Hey, tell us, how did the business come about? And Vince, at what point did you have the confidence that you could run a business?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. You're assuming I have the confidence to start with. No, so the short version is in the late 90s, our father was managing a division of a larger company. This division was the industrial coatings division of this business. And the buddy of his owned the larger company, was getting ready to retire. And anyway, they talked, and essentially our dad asked about buying that division out from the business, and the gentleman agreed to do that. And so a company at the time was called Paints and Solvents, and so that was born. And then it was the early 2000s, around 2002-ish. or late 2001, when he had the opportunity to bring on a new product line that was a little bit of call it an offshoot of really what they focused on.
Okay.
And so he didn't really have anyone per se on the staff that really knew that area. And so he thought it was an opportunity to, he approached me to say, hey, would you have interest in joining the family business at that point, and managing this new product line? It's like, I don't know anybody else that knows it. You don't know it, but so we might as well start fresh.
Yeah.
And, I think at the time I was happy where I was at. I was with a quote unquote tech company. This was still the tech boom before the bubble burst. I was really enjoying where I was at. But at the same time, having grown up in high school and college with our mom, who had frozen yogurt stores throughout Indianapolis, and even though you're just a high school kid just doing your thing, at the same time, we talked about this before, you're just not a high school punk doing a summer job and just showing up, a minute before you're supposed to be there or whatever. Because your name's kind of on the door, you actually care a little bit more.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, maybe that piqued my entrepreneurial interest. And so I enjoyed where I was at, but putting in long hours and knowing that it was really kind of, yes, it was benefiting me, but I wasn't the owner of the business.
Yeah.
There was something about wanting to have a piece of ownership, wanting to call something my own, regardless of what it is. And I don't know about you, Tim, but if you ask a bunch of your friends what they do today versus maybe what they studied in school, I think at least 50%, maybe greater, are doing something completely different than whatever they studied. And of course, I'm 51. It doesn't today. What my degree was in almost doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
So, but I wanted to have my own thing. I knew I wanted to be able to take something and grow it, kind of call it my own. And so, pretty much jumped at the opportunity, and pretty much haven't looked back. And I think the one thing that my brother Joe and I would say, 'cause my brother came in 2 years later, and I think some people ask, we say this to vendors, to new vendors, we say this to certain customers who might look at us, oh, these two silver spoon kids coming in on riding daddy's coattails. It couldn't be further from the truth. For better or worse, I'm a never satisfied person. Which is a double-edged sword, I realize. But Joe and I are both, we're not cruise control kids. We weren't silver spoon kids. Our father was a 24-year Navy veteran, retired as captain. So as you can imagine what that might have been growing up, pretty strict household. I probably have a few scars to prove that. And but they taught us, about hard work and all that. And Joe and I are always striving for what's next. So we accomplish a goal. It's kind of like athletics. You celebrate that victory tonight, but tomorrow back at it, right?
Sure.
Getting back to practice, and that was yesterday. Now focus on the next game or the next opponent, whatever. And we kind of look at it the same way. We have grown the business since probably 2005 or 6-ish. We kind of, we kind of had a powwow and said, hey, my dad's really good at sales. Like, he is the preeminent salesperson. Maybe not the greatest manager. Doesn't want to deal with certainly the accounting, finance, HR stuff, that sort of stuff. Perfect. You head up the sales team, go back out on the road, whatever. And our dad was literally a road warrior till he was 75. And even at 75, and I think some guys would admit this on our team, could outsell pretty much our entire sales team combined, and my brother and I had discussed, and I talked about what our strengths and weaknesses were, and then Joe took on the accounting finance role, and I was more sales, marketing, biz dev, and it just worked. And at the end of the day, though, our visions kind of aligned in that, here's where we want to go. How do we get there? And oh, by the way, once we get there, then what's next?
Right.
And so that's kind of the way we are. We're constantly growing. We've grown the business over 3 times what it was back then.
Oh, congratulations.
And, want to continue to grow as well.
Vince, tell us a little bit more about the company. I know you already mentioned earlier, but tell the name again. Tell us what you do and how do you help people?
Sure. So the business is called Accessa, ACCESSA. It used to be called Paints and Solvents, very generic name, pretty easy to tell what we did. That said, at the same time, the fire marshal or EPA or whomever sees that name, guess who's getting visited?
Right.
So we did a whole brand realignment with that and changed the name. Not just because we wanted something that was maybe not as generic, but something that we could really get behind, something that had more of a brand focus, and also something that allowed us to get into other avenues
Right.
should we choose to do so.
Sure.
So the business, again, based out of Indianapolis, we have 8 locations, 3 in the state of Indiana, 1 in Ohio, 2 in Illinois, and 1 out in Colorado, and 1 in Pennsylvania. And we're mostly Midwest focused, but we're selling industrial chemicals and industrial coatings to manufacturers. And if you looked at our customer mix, it seriously runs the gamut. So you have I would say wood coatings is about 2/3 of our business. So kitchen cabinets, furniture, anything made of wood.
Yeah.
We have a fair number of Amish customers in the Midwest because a lot of the Amish are in woodworking. And so what's interesting, if you're a sales rep of ours who isn't necessarily focused on one particular product line, you could go out and make sales calls and hit a small Amish shop making custom furniture or custom kitchen cabinets. And your next visit is a 500,000 square foot automotive plant, assembling various widgets and, for Honda or Ford or whomever.
Sure.
And they're using either our chemicals or our paints to paint said widget. It really runs the gamut. I think, I'm not an engineer, but the little engineering nerd in me, it kind of enjoys going out with some of our reps and seeing that.
Yeah.
And whether it's the small shop that's doing, custom hands-on work, it's not automated at all,
Yeah.
to the really highly automated plant that's really clean and well managed. Just watching how things are made is pretty interesting. and having a role in that process, I think, is pretty cool. And so I always learn something new when I go out with the guys and learn about things. And of course, you always kind of sit there like, how the hell did they think of
Right.
this process? Who came up with this idea? Like, it's crazy. And or you go into a shop, without mentioning names, but like you'll go into a shop that's making like 1 or 2 things. That's all they make. And there's just thousands of them. And you're like, who's consuming this much stuff? Are you guys the only manufacturer of this part in the entire world? And they're not. I mean, there's probably 20 companies out there doing the same thing.
Sure.
It's pretty wild. But it's cool. I think it's cool. It's kind of rewarding to see, let's say, your paint, if you will, the part of the paint you've provided. We don't manufacture it ourselves, but the paint we've sold them and helped them apply to their part. In particular, if it was a custom thing. So when we have stuff on the shelf, but if the opportunity warrants it, we may get a proposal that says, "Hey, we need a paint, but we need it to do this."
Right.
And so we'll evaluate what we have. We might have something that's about 80, gets us 80% of the way there. Then it's working with the vendor partner of ours and their R&D or lab teams to say, "Hey, here's the 20% this paint doesn't do. Here's what we need it to do. Is that possible?"
Yeah.
And kind of going through that process. And it can be bittersweet. I mean, I've worked on projects for 2 years that ultimately didn't pan out because we couldn't, in the end, get over like the last hurdle or two.
Right. Yeah.
Or you get to where, okay, you made the improvements here to get to check those boxes, but in order to get there, we had to give up something. It's not a perfect world, and did you achieve this, but then you gave up here? Did that cause it to fail? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It can be interesting. It's a long, the sales cycle time it can be longer for sure.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Vince, share a story where someone pushed you or inspired you that you could do it, even though maybe, you didn't know that you could, and the impact that person had on you.
Yeah, so there's a couple of stories there. One that really jumps out, and this goes back to the job I had before I joined this business. So this would have been 2001-ish. I was diagnosed, and but I was working for a company called Telemon up in Carmel, Indiana, and we had a project. Myself and a handful of others were working on this project. This is back when broadband internet, which most people don't even call it broadband anymore, just internet now.
Yeah.
But what was high speed non-dial-up, for those of us who remember what that is, 20-somethings who might be watching this are like, what's that? That was just kind of getting going, and it was mostly at a commercial level or a business level, but it was starting to make its way into homes. And essentially what we were doing was we were going to create an online or a website where you or I, as just regular residential consumers, could go online to find out, number one, can I get broadband in my house? Is it even available? As they were starting to build out the networks, you had to be close enough to certain points to get it. And then two, if I did, what were my options? And then what do those look like? Because it wasn't cheap back then. It was still pretty pricey.
Sure.
But it was a way of trying to aggregate this and educate the consumer on what it was, but also aggregate some services and allow them to actually purchase it and schedule it online. And then when we got those orders, they would essentially be handed off to the actual service provider then to go in and set up the install and all that. And so it was the first, call it consumer play, if you will, of this business. It was predominantly a technology distributor. We were distributing cable modems and DSL modems, which were modems for high-speed internet back then, and doing a variety of other things, doing cellular network build-outs on the engineering side. So this kind of made sense, but again, it's a consumer play, right? Totally different. Takes a lot of marketing dollars. That was probably our biggest hurdle, was trying to convince the owners, like, hey, you want to go to the direct to the consumer. That's awesome. We're super excited. But oh, by the way, that's going to take a lot of marketing. And here's kind of the dollar figures that looks like. And they weren't small numbers, as you well know. And anytime you want to market to consumers, it takes a lot of mass marketing, and as such, it takes a lot of dollars. And so that was kind of eye-opening for all of us. He wasn't super thrilled with those numbers because they were big numbers.
Yeah.
But the story is we're in the throes of putting this product together. We're kind of doing some soft launches. We were going out to San Jose like literally, once a quarter at minimum, and which was kind of exciting because that was the time that whole Silicon Valley and that whole tech scene was just exploding. But then all of a sudden I get sick. I get the diagnosis, and the owner of the business was in Europe at a meeting. And I remember waking up the next morning and to a voicemail, and it was him because he was 6-7 hours ahead, whatever. And he basically said, "Look, I just heard about the news. I just want you to know, I know this project is super important. It's been really visible for us, high profile within the business, and you're deep in it, but it's not important. What you're going through is much more important. You need to focus on that. So you do what you need to do, take as much time as you need to do. Don't worry about that project. It'll still be here when you get back. You focus on you." And I'll tell you, that was almost 25 years ago or 25 years ago. Man, I'll never forget that. Every time I see him, that's immediately what I think about. And it's a good lesson. As much as we spend our time trying to further our business, whether it's our own business or just a business that we work at, it's just work.
Yeah, that's awesome. Wow.
It's very important, but it's just work.
What's your biggest learning as a business owner?
Well, to have compassion and empathy and understand that, that there's a team approach.
Yeah.
I could work 80 hours a week, but I still need everyone else around here to do their role. Like, one interesting thing as you're growing a business, and I've seen it firsthand. I heard about it, but I've seen it firsthand where if you really want to scale, we realize we can't do it all ourselves. It's just not possible. And those entrepreneurs who understand that they have enough self-awareness to know what they're good at and what they're not, because none of us are phenomenal at everything. Trust me, I know I'm not. And then be smart enough to realize that and be humble enough to acknowledge it, and then say, okay, like I can look at a financial statement, but you sure as hell don't want me preparing one. I don't want to.
Yeah.
So I want to go find the best accountant, the best finance person I can find.
Yes.
I'm okay at sales, but I have to do all these other things. So that's going to spread me too thin. We need to have, a sales team. So I would say it's having self-awareness for sure. Yeah. It's really understanding it's a team approach. If you get the right people on the bus, but also in the right seats.
Yeah.
Little good to great reference there. And that's what's going to help, propel you forward. That's the way it's a constant work in progress.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen overnight.
It's such a huge insight and learning for business owners, as we all have to go through the struggle of letting go, because if we don't, we're the bottleneck. right? And the business can't grow beyond our capacity if we're not willing to bring others in and delegate and get things off of our plate. So yeah, thank you
Right.
for sharing
And
that.
part of that comes down to also what's your vision? Like
Mhm.
what do you want the business to be in, 5, 10, 20, however many years? Is it build it to sell? Is it build it for the next generation? Is it build it to hand it to the employees? Like what? And there's no wrong answer there. That's
Yep.
personal.
Yeah,
But whatever that is, it's kind of having that vision, if you will, and figuring out how to get there.
absolutely. Hey, Vince, we know that business success doesn't happen in isolation. So tell us about one of your biggest challenges over the years and someone who came alongside you and helped you through it.
Wow, there's several really. I think for us, one of our challenges is the products that we deal with. We're talking about chemicals, and as things with the environment change and people are becoming much more environmentally conscious, that permeates throughout not just the consumer side, but also the commercial side, the manufacturing side. And so how can we not only develop more more environmentally friendly products that still perform at a level that we need them to perform to protect the parts. Most people think paint, oh, just to make it look pretty. Yes, that's aesthetics is part of it, but a lot of these coatings have functional responsibilities. So, I mean, you can't just take a piece of steel, throw it on a car. I mean, back in you and I remember the 70s, like you saw cars with the big rusted out
Yeah.
holes, whatnot. That's because they weren't, you don't see that today, partially because cars aren't necessarily made of steel as much anymore. It's much
Yeah.
more aluminum, plastic, fiberglass, but they didn't have the pretreatment chemicals necessarily. The paints weren't as good. So they have functional purposes.
Yeah.
Um, but it's developing ones that are friendlier to the applicator and the people in the plant.
Mm.
So lowering VOCs, which is volatile organic compounds, more than anything, more things than anybody here wanted to know. Reducing hazardous air pollutants.
Yeah.
You have waste, whether you like it or not. So it's something that you can dispose of in a better manner,
Hmm.
and then that just takes time. It's R&D, right? So I've been in this business now for almost 24 years. The call it water-based paints of 20 years ago were okay, but nothing great. And the knocks on them then was they just take too long to dry, especially in the summertime in Indiana when it's hot and humid.
Right.
It just takes too long to dry, and they just weren't robust enough. They didn't they weren't chemically resistant enough, or they weren't corrosion resistant enough.
Mm.
But like anything, 20 years later, a lot of those products are actually pretty darn good now. And
Yeah.
so we've got people evaluating them. There's still some that are resistant to change until they're forced to do so. And so that's a struggle. It's us understanding that new technology, us trying to help, if you will, preach the word to our communities,
Sure.
our customer base about them, and why it's important for us to start to make that transition. And then ultimately, what's going to happen is two things. A, we're being it's harder for us to do business because we're storing a lot of this stuff under roof.
Mm.
There are certain organizations, departments
Right.
that don't like that. And so the restrictions on us for carrying that inventory and managing inventory are getting much, much more restrictive, which is making it harder to do business, and much, much more expensive too.
Yeah.
So we're kind of being forced to change from that angle. And then again, our customers who are manufacturing the parts, who are applying the products, they're also getting hit,
Yeah.
depending on where they are. Some places are more stringent than others.
Sure.
And so they're kind of, I won't say be forced to change, but in a way they are being forced to change too.
Sure.
So it's probably for the better ultimately. It's going to be painful to go through because look, it's change, right? There's
Yeah.
only one constant in life, and that's change. And some
Yeah.
people deal with it better than others. But that's probably one of the biggest challenges we have right now is adapting to just environmental change, and how we still need these products,
Yeah.
but how can we make them safer, not only to handle and store and sell, but also safer for those who are applying them.
Yeah. Makes sense. Hey, Vince, I'm gonna kind of put you on the spot here. I want you to um, share three people who have helped you in your business owner journey that you're most grateful for them being there for your, in terms of helping your businesses grow. So who are those three people and how they help you?
Yeah. Well, so first one I would have to say is our father. I'd be in big trouble if I didn't say that. Just, like any father to any child, just the experiences they've already had and how how they can use those to influence you and shape your life. And
Yeah.
there can be that argument between letting your child learn on their own and stumble and fall and figure it out, but at the same time, those of us, we don't want them to have to recreate the wheel. So if there's
Yeah.
things I already know that aren't going to work, I
Yeah.
want to share that with them. And whether they choose to listen or not, I mean, you only have so much control, right?
Yeah.
If they blow you off, they blow you off. I mean, it wouldn't be the first time our kids have blown us off. I have two 20-year-olds and a 17-year-old. I get it all the time now. So for sure, my dad, to start with, a guy by the name of Albert Chen. He was the CEO and owner of Telemon back when I was there. Learned a lot from him, and I was there for about 3.5 years. Learned a lot in those 3.5 years. We were growing rapidly, and really, again, that story I told about when I got sick and how he reacted to that. Learned a lot from that experience just by itself. So he's another one. And then, gosh, there's quite a few. I'm gonna say, so we have one of our vendors is a very large public company, and while there are things that come with that I'm grateful we don't have all the bureaucracy and we can make a quick decision. And not to throw them under the bus, but it doesn't take 6 months to make a decision like you and I could make right here, like now, like in 5 minutes. But they had a president of their global finishes division, I think it was. And we got to know him pretty well. Usually we get to know their managers in about a 2-3 year stint, and they move on. The next one comes in, you're starting all over again, and just this recycled process. But he was in that position for a little while, and I'll tell you, again, I'm not trying to stereotype large public company management, but he was very down to earth, very even keeled, not as bureaucratic or didn't come across that way, but we just developed a really good relationship with him. And he was just a cool dude, to put it in non-technical terms. He was really good to get to know. He seemed genuinely interested in our business and was genuinely interested in our partnership and wanted to know how can we work better together, as well as what can they do to help us, and was an advocate, and yes, he understood that to do things within their system, it was like maneuvering a very large ship. It takes a long time and it goes slowly, but at the same time he had no qualms with going back to corporate, if you will, and say, hey, yes, Accessa is looking for this, but oh, by the way, they're kind of a leader amongst our distribution partners. If it's going to help them, it's going to help all of our other partners. It makes sense. Let's look into this. And so that was very refreshing.
Vince, as you look forward to the next 1 to 3 years, what's your number one priority or the biggest challenge that you need to achieve or work through in order to achieve your goals?
Yeah, so this is my answer. You're interviewing my brother; he might give you a different answer. That's why it's good. We're kind of a yin and yang. I'm always wanting to grow, and I get that has to be strategic, and you have to have some guardrails, if you will. But for the next 1 to 3 years, I want to see our next evolution of growth, taking another step in that direction, whatever that may be. Whether that's going into a new market organically on our own, whether that's making another acquisition. I don't know. Our industry doesn't grow rapidly on its own. So if you want to continue to grow, it's typically via acquisition or going into new markets on your own, which are two separate anomalies and have their own sets of challenges. But I think the next 1 to 3 years, we acquired a business in Pittsburgh, and that's been about 2 years now. And so the next 1 to 3 years, I think I would like to see at least another one. If not, also maybe a new market that we go into. And needless to say, that list exists of targets, if you will, or what the wish list, as we call it. And it would be nice to see another 1 or 2 of those checked off and just take that next step.
Yeah, very exciting. Hey, last question, Vince. Jim Rohn says we become the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with. So as you think about that quote, what advice would you have for other business owners who are trying to do it on their own?
Well, yeah, I'm sure there's a quote out there similar to what you just mentioned, but I find myself very lucky. Meaning, I grew up in the neighborhood I live in now, which some people might think is creepy, but my wife did it first. She's not from Indianapolis. She's like, "Why are we moving so close to your parents and where we grew up?" Where you grew up, but it's turned out. I think she would admit this. It's turned out to be one of the best things, simply because there's a close knit group of people that I grew up with who
Mm,
also all live back here. And when
yeah.
I look at the 4 or 5 buddies of mine who I grew up going through grade school, we all went to the same grade school from like kindergarten, first grade up to 8th grade, and then the nice thing was we have a lot of different high schools we could go to here, but most of us went to the same high school. And then a couple of us ultimately also went on to IU together
Oh, yeah.
and started the
Yeah.
same fraternity. So there's literally 2 or 3 guys who I went to school with from first grade through college graduation. And I'll tell you, I would like to think they'll say the same thing, but I think it was the best thing for us because we all push one another.
Mm,
We were raised in families that had similar values.
yeah.
Um, and I mean, there was some competitive spirit in there too, which I think was healthy, but it wasn't like, it wasn't toxic competition,
Right.
but it was competition to challenge each of us, and we wanted to keep up
Yeah.
with one another. And I think ultimately, if you look at where we all are today, I think that has a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
So, we say this about our kids too. We want them to grow up and surround themselves with like-minded individuals, people who have the same dreams, same aspirations, same work ethic, all that sort of thing, and then they can kind of all feed off one another. So I think you want to do the same thing today. Like that was growing up, but
Yeah.
today you are who you surround yourself with, and so when I look at my core group of friends, many of them are either business owners or other successful professionals, and we feed off one another. Because one thing I will say is, you get a group of 4 or 5 of your buddies together, and you're all doing different things,
Yeah.
totally different industries. Maybe one's a doctor, one's a lawyer, one's a business owner, but in a completely different market than you are. A lot of us have a lot of the same problems,
Yes. Yep. Yep.
and you just never know. Like, okay, why would a doctor have anything to do with my business? But maybe if he has his own practice or he runs a department at the hospital, he's encountered it. Trust
Yes.
me, he's encountered HR issues.
Yes.
He's
Right.
encountered whatever else. Maybe suddenly I have an issue and he's like, oh yeah, we went through that 2 years ago and here's what we did. And it's like, oh sweet.
Yeah.
And so it's that sort of thing. Surround yourself with other successful individuals, people that either you want to be like or you just you're excited to be around. And
Yeah.
I think it goes a long way.
I like what you just shared about, the best practices are the best practices. Those are my words, not yours, but the idea of, how to run a great business is sort of there's a blueprint of, right, here are the best practices, here are the things that need to, they're industry agnostic, right? There's still the
Right.
how do I run my actual, business industry and all of the tricks and trades of that. But yeah, the best practices are the best practices. So getting insights and wisdom from others who are running great businesses can be invaluable.
Yep, for sure. And get out there, get out in your markets. Don't sit behind a screen 24/7. You got to get out there. I will say we're doing this virtually, but there's something still to be said for face-to-face time.
Yeah.
And maybe that's old school. That's something I learned from my dad. Teams is great, or Zoom, or whatever vehicle you're using. It's nice to have. It's better than just strictly a phone call, in my opinion.
Yes.
But you got to get out there still. You got to see the customers. You got to see your partners.
Yes.
You got to have the face-to-face time.
Yep, absolutely agree. Vince, sounds like you've been blessed with some incredible people in your journey. If they were all here on the show today, what would you want to say to them?
I think, simply put, thank you all for being an influence on my life, and I hope that that will continue for as long as we can make it. So pretty simple. Just a big thank you.
Awesome. It's been a pleasure speaking with you today, Vince. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Yeah, likewise. I appreciate the opportunity and look forward to having another conversation.
Thanks for listening to the Self-Made is a Myth show. Please help spread this movement by liking and subscribing to our show and following us on Facebook and LinkedIn. To join our movement, go to bemadtogether.com. Okay, folks, that's a wrap. Please pay it forward and be sure to tune in next time to the Self-Made is a Myth podcast.